The clerk turned the computer screen toward me. Just one document, one page with my grandmother's shaky signature at the bottom, and Katerina's name at the top, where mine was supposed to be. For the first time in 11 weeks, I stopped feeling sorry for my sister. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand what 3 years of caregiving looks like before you can understand what my sister took from me. My name is Nadia Kowalski. I'm 29 years old, and for the past 3 years, I lived 10 minutes from my grandmother Helen's house in suburban Columbus, Ohio. 3 years of early morning appointments at the neurologist. 3 years of grocery runs twice a week because Helen kept forgetting she'd already eaten. 3 years of overnight stays on her couch when she'd wake up at 3 a.m., not knowing where she was, not knowing who I was sometimes, calling me by my mother's name. 3 years of saying no to everything else in my life so I could say yes to her. I turned down a full-time graphic design job in Chicago. $62,000 a year. Real salary, real benefits, real career. My boss at the time, a woman named Linda, called me personally to try to change my mind. Nadia, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around twice. I know. I said no anyway. Because someone had to take care of Helen, and that someone was always me. It had been that way for years before the dementia even started. When I was 22, fresh out of design school, Helen fell and broke her hip. Surgery, physical therapy, 6 weeks of recovery. Mom was in Portugal, Dad was on his honeymoon. His second one, congratulations. Katerina was 19 and in her first year of college in Seattle, so I moved into Helen's spare room for 6 weeks. 6 weeks became 3 months. 3 months became a habit. I started doing her taxes, driving her to the dentist, making sure she ate something other than toast and black coffee. Nobody asked me to. Nobody thanked me for it. It just happened. The way these things happen in families where one person is closer and one person is more available, and nobody ever stops to notice that those two things are always the same person. Helen noticed, though. She was sharp then, sharp as anything, and she noticed. "You're here too much," she told me once, sitting at her kitchen table with a crossword puzzle half finished. "You should be out living your life, Nadia." I told her I liked being there, which was true. Her house was the only place that ever felt completely normal to me, the one place where nobody was leaving or disappearing or starting over with someone new. Just Helen, and the crossword, and the coffee that was always slightly too strong. My sister Katerina lived in Seattle. She worked in real estate. She visited Helen once a year, around Christmas, for about 4 days. She called every couple of weeks, short calls, mostly asking how things were going, occasionally saying, "Let me know if you need anything," in that tone people use when they don't actually mean it. We were close once when we were kids, before our parents divorced when I was 14 and Katerina was 11, and the family sort of dissolved. Mom moved abroad, Dad remarried and got very busy with his new life. Helen was the only family that felt like family anymore. Her house was where we both went for holidays, where we both felt like we belonged. And that house was worth about $280,000, which in suburban Ohio is a lot more than it sounds. Helen had no formal will. She never wrote one down, but she told us both years ago when she was still sharp and clear and completely herself. "When I'm gone, you split the house, 50-50. That's the fair way. Simple, clean, done." Katerina was there when she said it. We were both sitting at that kitchen table, the same one where Helen did her crossword puzzles and I did my homework as a kid. Katerina nodded and said, "Of course, Grandma, that's totally fair." She sounded like she meant it. We were 23 and 20, and nobody was thinking about what would happen when Helen died, because Helen was sharp and healthy and seemed like she'd live forever. 50-50 was an abstract thing, a someday conversation, not a plan we ever put on paper. That was a mistake. In hindsight, the biggest one. Except it wasn't done. Not even close. Helen died on a Tuesday in March, peacefully, in her sleep, after a short illness that came fast at the end. I was the one who found her that morning. I was the one who called the ambulance, called the funeral home, called Katerina. I handled the obituary, the service, the reception afterward at the community center, where Helen had played bingo every Thursday for 20 years. Katerina flew in from Seattle, stayed 2 days, cried beautifully at the funeral in a way that made everyone say, "What a lovely girl," and left. Before she left, she squeezed my hand and said, "We should figure out the house soon. I'll look into it. I work in real estate. I know these things. Don't worry about it." Don't worry about it. I was exhausted. I was grieving. I was relieved someone else wanted to handle the paperwork. So I said, okay. Looking back, I should have paid more attention. Katerina had always done this, offered to help with things that sounded big, but turned out to be invisible. When we were teenagers and the house needed repairs after Dad left, Katerina would say, "I'll call someone," and then nobody would call anyone, and I'd end up figuring it out myself. It wasn't malicious then. It was just how she was. The one who makes promises and lets someone else do the actual work. I'd spent my whole life being that someone else. Hearing her say, "I'll handle it," felt familiar, comfortable even. Like a script we'd been following for years. 3 weeks later, I called Katerina to ask about next steps. She said, "Give me a few weeks. I have contacts. I'm handling everything?" Fine. I was still barely functional. I spent most of my days staring at Helen's kitchen and not knowing what to do with my hands now that there was no one to cook for. 6 weeks after the funeral, I got a letter in the mail at Helen's address. It was from a real estate firm I'd never heard of. Addressed to Katerina Kowalski, owner, a routine maintenance notice about a property listing. I read it twice and set it down. Maybe Katerina was just starting the listing process early. That made sense, right? She works in real estate. She knows what she's doing. 8 weeks after the funeral, I called again. I tried to keep it casual. "Hey, I saw a letter from a real estate company. About the listing?" Katerina's voice changed immediately. "Why are you checking up on me? I said I'm handling it. You spent 3 years saying how exhausted you were from taking care of Grandma. Now let me do something for once." That stung, more than I wanted to admit. I backed off. I didn't want to fight, not now, not over paperwork. So I said nothing. But something about that conversation stayed with me. The way she snapped, the way she deflected. I've known my sister for 26 years, and that wasn't how she talks when everything is fine. 10 weeks after the funeral, I went to the Franklin County Recorder's office myself. The clerk was a quiet woman who pulled up property records on a computer screen without asking any questions. I gave her Helen's address. She typed it in. And there it was. A quitclaim deed. Filed 4 months ago. Full ownership of the property transferred from Helen Kowalski to Katerina Kowalski. Signed by Helen. Dated November 14th of last year. I stared at that date. November 14th. 8 months before Helen died. 8 months before the funeral, before the grief, before, "I'll handle everything, don't worry." My grandmother had signed this paper while she was alive, while she had dementia. I sat in the parking lot of the county recorder's office for 20 minutes before I called my sister. "Katerina, I'm looking at a quitclaim deed right now. Helen's property. Transferred to your name. Signed November 14th. Silence on the other end. Then, "What deed? I have no idea what you're talking about." "I'm sitting in the county recorder's office. I'm looking at it right now. Your name. Grandma's signature." Another pause. Longer this time. Then her voice shifted. Smoother, more casual, like she was switching gears. "Oh, that. Yeah, Grandma wanted me to have the house. She told me herself. She signed it when I visited last Christmas. She knew exactly what she was doing. But Helen's dementia was documented by then. I knew that because I'd been at every single doctor's appointment for 3 years. I knew the cognitive assessments, the progression, the way Helen's good days got fewer and her confused days got more. November was a bad month. I remembered it specifically because I'd almost called an ambulance twice that month when Helen got lost walking to the mailbox at the end of her own driveway. The next day I called Dr. Susan Mercer, Helen's doctor for the past 4 years, the woman who treated Helen through the dementia progression, who knew every detail of her cognitive decline. I asked her a simple question. Was my grandmother capable of understanding a legal document in November? Dr. Mercer didn't hesitate. She checked her notes. She's meticulous, keeps everything documented, and told me, "I have a cognitive assessment from October 28th, about 2.5 weeks before the date you mentioned. The notes indicate moderate stage dementia. Patient struggles with complex decisions. Prone to agreeing to requests without full understanding of what she's agreeing to. She paused. Based on my clinical documentation from that period, I would say Helen did not have the capacity to understand what a property transfer document meant. So there it was. My grandmother couldn't understand what she was signing, and my sister brought that paper for her to sign anyway. I hired an elder law attorney named Patricia Voss. Cost me $3,000, almost half of everything I had left after 3 years of reduced freelance income while I was caregiving. Patricia is sharp, thorough, and very calm in a way that made me feel like someone finally had this under control. First meeting, I brought everything. The deed from the county recorder, Dr. Mercer's cognitive assessment records, the texts between me and Katerina where she said she was handling everything. Patricia reviewed it all in one afternoon. Then she called me. I need to run a title search and check for liens on the property. There may be more here than just the deed. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single comment. Thank you. 3 days later, Patricia called again. Her voice was very calm. That's how I knew it was bad. There's a home equity loan against the property. $85,000. Taken out in January, 2 months before your grandmother died. The borrower is listed as Katerina Kowalski. $85,000. My sister had taken $85,000 out of my grandmother's house while my grandmother was alive and confused and couldn't understand what was happening. She didn't just steal the house, she emptied it first. I hung up the phone and sat on my kitchen floor for a while, not crying. I was past crying by then. There's a particular kind of feeling you get when you realize that someone you grew up with, someone you shared bedrooms and birthday parties and holidays with, made a calculated decision to rob a sick old woman. And that sick old woman was the person you loved most in the world. And you were the one taking care of her the entire time it was happening. I was the one driving Helen to appointments. I was the one making sure she took her medication. I was the one sitting with her at 3 in the morning when she was frightened and confused and didn't know where she was. And while I was doing all of that, while I was giving up everything to keep Helen safe and comfortable and cared for, my sister flew in, brought a piece of paper, waited for the right moment, and took $85,000. I thought about calling Katerina right then, screaming at her, demanding to know why, but I didn't. Because Patricia had been clear about one thing in our first meeting. Do not confront her about specific evidence. Let her keep talking. Every lie she tells now is another lie we can prove later. So I put the phone down. I poured a glass of water. I sat on the floor a little longer. And then I called Patricia back and said, "What do we need next?" The answer was, everything. Every document, every record, every piece of paper that could prove what happened and when. Patricia requested the full loan file from First Federal Savings. She requested the notary's original records. She requested Katerina's travel records, flights, hotel bookings, anything that could place her in Columbus on specific dates. And she asked me for something I hadn't thought about. My text messages with Katerina. All of them. Going back months. Patricia kept digging. That's what good attorneys do. The loan documents from the bank told their own story. Katerina had personally walked into the First Federal Savings branch in Columbus on January 8th and signed every page of the loan application herself. She was physically in Columbus that day, but I had a text message from Katerina on January 6th, 2 days before, that said, "Hey, crazy week at work. Still in Seattle. Can't talk much right now." Patricia pulled that text record. Katerina had lied about where she was. She was in Columbus taking out an $85,000 loan while telling me she was at her desk in Seattle. Patricia also tracked down the notary who witnessed Helen's signature on the deed, a woman named Barbara Pritchard. Barbara agreed to meet with Patricia. What she said in that meeting made my stomach drop. The older woman, your grandmother, she kept asking, "What is this?" during the signing, multiple times. And the younger woman, your sister, kept telling her, "It's just paperwork, Mom, don't worry about it. Just sign here." I should have stopped it. A notary is supposed to verify the signer understands the document. I saw that she didn't understand it, and I let it happen anyway. "Just paperwork, Mom, don't worry about it." My grandmother, who used to quiz me on my spelling homework, who remembered every birthday in the family without writing them down, who built a life in that house over 40 years, raised 2 daughters, lost a husband, survived on her own for decades. That woman sat at her own kitchen table and signed away her home because someone she loved told her not to worry about it. Patricia laid out the full legal picture during our next meeting. She was calm and systematic about it, the way she was about everything, but I could tell she wanted me to understand exactly what we were up against. Helen died without a formal will. Intestate, the legal term. Under Ohio law, without a will, property goes to the nearest heirs equally. That would be me and Katerina. 50-50, simple, clean, exactly what Helen wanted. Except Katerina transferred the property out of Helen's name before she died. She did it while Helen was still alive. Which means the house technically left Helen's estate before death. And if it's not in the estate when she dies, Ohio's equal split rule doesn't automatically apply. So Patricia has to void the deed first. Prove Helen lacked the mental capacity to understand what she was signing. Prove it was executed under undue influence. That someone pressured or manipulated a vulnerable person into signing. That's 2 separate legal arguments, both requiring evidence, both requiring a hearing in front of a judge. Only if the deed is voided does the house return to the estate. Only then does the 50-50 split kick in. And the $85,000 loan is a separate fight entirely. Even if we void the deed, the loan was taken out by Katerina using the property as collateral. The bank lent money based on a fraudulent document. That loan has to be challenged on its own. Proved fraudulent, proved void, proved that First Federal Savings should never have approved it in the first place. So what happens if we lose? I asked. Patricia looked at me steadily. If we cannot prove lack of capacity and undue influence, the deed stands. Katerina owns the house. She keeps the sale proceeds. She keeps the $85,000. You get nothing. Nothing. After 3 years of caregiving, after turning down a career, after finding Helen every morning, making sure she was alive, keeping her fed and medicated and not lost in her own house. Nothing. She's not going to keep it, I said. Patricia smiled. It was a small smile, the kind lawyers get when they know they have something good. No, she said. She's not. The court hearing was set for week 18, Franklin County Common Pleas Court, Judge Rebecca Thornton presiding. Katerina showed up with her own attorney, a man named David Whitfield, who looked expensive and confident in a way that told me Katerina was spending money she didn't have on this fight. Ironic, considering she already had $85,000 of money that wasn't hers. Patricia didn't rush. She presented everything in order, methodically, letting each piece of evidence land before moving to the next. First, Dr. Mercer's medical records, the cognitive assessment from October 28th documenting moderate-stage dementia. Dr. Mercer took the stand and testified in her own words. In my professional medical opinion, Helen Kowalski did not have the cognitive capacity to understand a property transfer document in November of that year. She was calm, certain, unshakable. 30 years of medical practice behind every word. Second, the deed timeline. Signed November 14th, cognitive impairment documented October 28th. 17 days between a doctor's written assessment saying Helen couldn't understand complex decisions and a deed transferring her house to someone else's name. Third, Barbara Pritchard, the notary. She took the stand and told the court exactly what she told Patricia. Helen asking, "What is this?" Katerina saying, "Don't worry about it." Barbara's hands were shaking when she testified. She looked genuinely guilty. Good. She should. Fourth, the loan. Patricia placed the First Federal Savings documents on the table, Katerina's signature on the application. The date, January 8th. Then Patricia placed Katerina's text message on the screen. January 6th. Still in Seattle. Can't talk much right now. She let the courtroom read both documents in silence. David Whitfield shifted in his seat. He didn't look confident anymore. Fifth, 3 years of caregiving documentation. Every doctor's appointment I'd taken Helen to, logged with dates and times, grocery receipts, Helen's prescription records showing I was the one picking up her medications, travel records showing Katerina was in Columbus exactly twice in 3 years, Christmas 2022 and once in the summer of 2023. And then Patricia presented the last piece, a text message. Not between me and Katerina. Between Helen and her neighbor, a woman named Dorothy Marsh, sent 2 years before Helen died. Helen had been texting Dorothy about small things for months: the weather, the news, what she'd had for dinner. But on this particular Tuesday, Helen wrote, "My girls will split the house when I'm gone. 50-50. That's the fair thing to do. I want to make sure that happens." Dorothy had saved every text. Patricia had asked for them, and there it was, in Helen's own words, 2 years before the deed was signed. She wanted 50-50. She said so in writing, to someone she trusted. I watched Katerina read that text when Patricia put it on the screen. Watched the color leave her face in real time. She hadn't known about it. Nobody knew about it except Dorothy. David Whitfield stood up and made his case. He was good at it. Smooth, confident, the kind of lawyer who practices his delivery in the mirror. "Your Honor, Helen Kowalski was a competent adult who made a voluntary decision regarding her property. The deed was properly notarized. My client visited her grandmother, they had a conversation about the future of the house, and Helen made her wishes clear. The fact that Helen had a dementia diagnosis does not automatically mean she lacked capacity for every single decision she ever made. Cognitive impairment exists on a spectrum. People with early-stage dementia make legal decisions every day." He was right about one thing. Dementia is a spectrum, but he didn't have an answer for any of the specifics. Patricia stood up and walked through them one by one. Why did the notary hear Helen asking what the document was, if Helen understood it so clearly? Why did Katerina tell her to stop worrying instead of explaining it? Why did a cognitive assessment from 2.5 weeks before the signing specifically note that Helen struggles with complex decisions and is prone to agreeing to requests without full understanding? And Patricia placed the January 6th text message back on the screen. Why did Katerina tell Nadia she was in Seattle on January 6th when she was in Columbus on January 8th signing an $85,000 loan application? David looked at the text message. He looked at Katerina. Katerina was staring at the table. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "this was not a grandmother making a voluntary decision. This was a young woman in real estate, a professional who handles property transfers for a living, walking into her grandmother's house with a legal document, waiting for a moment when the caregiver was not present, and having a confused elderly woman sign it. And then, 2 months later, taking $85,000 against that property while lying to her sister about where she was. 2 separate acts, both deliberate, both documented." Judge Thornton took a recess to review the evidence. 20 minutes. Patricia and I sat in the hallway in plastic chairs and didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Either the evidence was enough or it wasn't. Patricia had done everything she could. I had done everything I could. Now it was up to a judge I'd never met to look at the papers and make a decision. Across the hall, Katerina and David Whitfield were whispering intensely. David looked stressed in a way that expensive lawyers don't usually look in public. Katerina's hands were folded in her lap, very still, the way they get when she's trying not to show what she's feeling. I know because I grew up watching that posture, every time Mom and Dad fought. Every time something bad happened, and Katerina went quiet and still and pretended she wasn't there. She looked at me once, across the hallway, just once. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see my face. I wanted her to know exactly who she was sitting across from. Not the quiet sister who backs off when things get hard, not the one who says okay and doesn't push back. Someone else. Someone who spent 11 weeks pulling apart every lie she'd told and building a case that a judge was about to read. Judge Thornton came back. She read her ruling without preamble. The quitclaim deed dated November 14th is voided. The evidence demonstrates that Helen Kowalski lacked legal capacity to understand and consent to this property transfer. The deed was executed under undue influence. The home equity loan of $85,000 obtained using this fraudulent deed is also declared void. The property returns to Helen Kowalski's estate. Under Ohio intestate succession law, it is divided equally between the 2 granddaughters. She looked up from her papers directly at Katerina. "Ms. Kowalski, the court is referring this matter to the Franklin County District Attorney's Office for investigation regarding elder financial exploitation and mortgage fraud." The room went very quiet. Katerina's attorney put his head in his hands. That was the moment. Not the ruling itself, Though that mattered, not the $85,000. Though that mattered too. It was Helen's text. 50-50. That's the fair thing to do. My grandmother, sitting at her kitchen table with her phone, typing out what she wanted to happen to her house after she was gone, making sure someone knew. And my sister walked into that house months later with a piece of paper and a confused old woman and took it anyway. The fair thing to do. Helen always believed in fair. The house sold for $282,000. Patricia handled the probate process. It took 2 months of paperwork and court filings, the kind of bureaucracy that would have driven me crazy if I hadn't already spent 11 weeks wading through county records and bank documents. After fees, probate costs, and Patricia's legal fees, each half came to about $135,000. Katerina's share was reduced by the $85,000 she owed back to the estate for the fraudulent loan. Her actual payout, $50,000. Mine, $135,000. The difference between what my sister walked away with and what I walked away with was exactly the amount she stole. 3 months after the ruling, the Franklin County District Attorney's Office charged Katerina with elder financial exploitation. She pleaded guilty 6 months later. Misdemeanor, 2 years probation, community service. No prison time, but a criminal record. Her real estate license in Washington was suspended pending the probation period. The career she'd built in Seattle, the career that supposedly made her too busy to visit Helen more than once a year, gone. My father called after the news story ran locally. "I had no idea she would do something like this," he said. "Can we talk about it?" "You weren't there for 3 years while I took care of Grandma," I said. "Katerina wasn't there either, but she showed up once with a piece of paper and took everything. You want to talk now that there's a news story?" He didn't have an answer. I didn't hang up on him. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I just said, "Think about that," and ended the call. And then I stopped picking up when he called after that. Some conversations don't need a dramatic ending. They just need to stop. Katerina sent one email 3 months after the ruling. Short, direct, no preamble, no excuses before the actual confession. Just the confession itself, like she'd practiced typing it and finally hit send. I was desperate. I owe $45,000 in credit card debt. The apartment in Seattle costs more than I make. I saw the house and I saw a way out. I thought Grandma wouldn't notice. I thought you wouldn't check. I thought I could pay it back before anyone found out. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I read it twice. $45,000 in credit card debt. So that was it. That was the number. That was what my grandmother's house was worth to Katerina. $45,000 of lifestyle debt she couldn't afford. She looked at a $280,000 house and saw a way to pay off her credit card. She looked at a confused old woman and saw an opportunity. She looked at me, quiet, self-sacrificing, always says okay, Nadia, and saw someone who wouldn't fight back. She was wrong about that last one. I forwarded the email to Patricia with one line. Add this to the file. I never responded to Katerina. I moved to Chicago 4 months after the hearing. Took the design job I'd turned down 3 years ago. Same company, same position, $62,000 a year. Linda, my old boss, had kept the door open. "I always thought you'd come back," she said. "Take your time settling in." 1 year later, I'm a senior designer. Got promoted after 6 months because I'm good at this, and I always was. I just spent 3 years doing something else instead, something that mattered more at the time. Katerina is working as an office manager at a small firm in Seattle, making $38,000 a year, paying back the $85,000 in monthly installments the court ordered. She has not contacted me again. Helen's house is gone now, sold to a young couple with 2 kids who are painting the kitchen the exact same sage green that Helen always liked. I know because Dorothy sent me a photo. Dorothy sends me photos sometimes of the neighborhood, of the garden next door, of small things that remind her of Helen. I named my cat Helen. She sleeps on the couch every afternoon in a patch of sun, exactly the way my grandmother used to. Thank you so much for watching. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss the best part. You will love it. See you in the next one.